September 16th, 1935. The Cotton Club in Harlem pulsed under dim lights and sharp suits. A hired enforcer threw open his hand and smacked Bumpy Johnson across the face before 200 people. No eruption, no gunfire, just silence. 4 seconds. Bumpy didn't flinch. 47 minutes later, Harlem's criminal order would never look the same. This wasn't some petty payback. It wasn't ego. It was a trap being sprung, with a single act of restraint as bait. So how does a single slap shatter an empire? To grasp that, you have to rewind, back to the moment it all began. That same evening, September 16th, 1935, the Cotton Club was dressed in glamour, but the air thickened with the scent of adrenaline beneath expensive aftershave and whiskey. The room should have held half as many people, yet was packed with bodies dripping sweat in their tailored suits. A record of Duke Ellington's sophisticated ladies spun endlessly, scratching a weary tune into the haze, untouched for hours. Every fourth beat skipped, the platter nearly worn bare. Still, the booze flowed freely, and the cocaine kept the downtown tourists alert enough to pretend Harlem belonged to them for a night. Bumpy Johnson anchored himself at table 7, back to the wall. A non-negotiable rule for anyone in the life expecting to reach 30 when most don't live past 25. His drink was top-shelf Barolo, an $8 bottle smuggled straight from a Little Italy wine cellar by Carmenea, man who hadn't forgotten the night Bumpy slit open 3 Sicilian throats with a razor for sniffing around the garment district. Carmine knew better than to gossip. In wine and silence, debts got paid. Bumpy accepted both like gospel. 13 minutes before midnight, a force of arrogance entered the room. Mickey Doyle strutted through the back door like he was the landlord of the air everyone else breathed. He did collections for Dutch Schultz, which meant kneecaps cascaded under his hammer, and stores burned if rent didn't. His gunmetal gray suit probably ran over $200. Polished shoes that offered a crystal-clear preview of your own funeral. His fists were slabs of violence, crisscrossed with the history of smashed faces and glass shards. He didn't wait for invite, didn't nod, just walked straight to Bumpy's table, ignoring the man who ran Harlem's numbers like God ran commandments. Without so much as a second breath, Doyle's open palm crashed into Bumpy's cheek like thunder rolled into flesh. The sound silenced the club, every voice falling mid-sentence, every eye trained on the scene like a pistol. Bumpy's head whipped sideways. A red mark stamped across his cheek would deepen into a bruise by morning. The metallic taste of blood spread across his tongue where teeth bit into the inside of his mouth. His wineglass wobbled but stood as firm as he did. His hand didn't twitch. His posture didn't change. He tested his jaw once, intact. He turned back to face Doyle with clinical precision, like a man unfazed by pain, like a man who's buried worse provocations in shallow dirt a few counties north. His stare, cold, vacant, bottomless, met Doyle's and didn't blink. Doyle stood stiff, waiting for a storm, for retaliation, for that .38 snub that everyone swore Bumpy carried holstered under his left arm. For flip tables, shrieks, and chaos, but the moment didn't detonate. Instead, Bumpy lifted his glass, drank slowly, deliberately, like he was catching a quiet moment in his home, not sitting in a club full of men waiting for hell to break. The silence choking the room wasn't calm. It was dread, the breathless pause when 200 men secretly realize they're watching someone seal their own fate and everyone nearby's. 2 tables over, Stephanie St. Clair didn't flinch. She was counting the day's receipts. Her runners kept their heads down. She saw exactly what Bumpy was orchestrating and knew better than to speak while judgment was being written in silence. Piece by piece, Doyle's cockiness began leaking from his face. He hadn't triggered the animal rage he'd banked on, a rage easy to counter and predict. Instead, he faced stillness, and stillness meant math, precision, intent, calculated ruin. He looked around like a man feeling the walls close in, then, slowly, took a step back. Then another. He moved toward the exit, feet suddenly aware they could no longer carry him to safety fast enough. Bumpy set the wineglass back where it had been, an exact match to the ring it left before. He tilted his head a degree to the left, a subtle but pointed command. Doyle understood. He had just purchased a death not of fury, but of design. A death that would introduce him to levels of pain he hadn't known existed. And by the time anyone found whatever was left of him, even his mother wouldn't be able to recognize the pieces. Doyle exited 9 minutes before midnight. Unaware the hourglass had flipped, he quickened his stride toward a car that would prove useless, a future now erased, with 47 minutes left to believe escape was still possible. Bumpy stood, smoothed his jacket over the flattened fabric Doyle brushed against, and moved toward the back room, where plans didn't wait for emotion to catch up. The men who'd witnessed him absorb the blow without budging didn't see weakness. They didn't see pride swallowed. They saw war declared with the patience of kings. Inside, Stephanie looked up from her numbers. "You're going to kill him slow," she said. It wasn't a guess. Bumpy nodded. "So slow Dutch Schultz will hear every holler, every bone snap, and realize Harlem's not for sale, no matter the offer." She returned to her ledger. Bumpy pulled up a chair, picked up a phone, and began pulling levers men would bleed to pay for. Favors turned debts, debts turned pain. The bar clock ticked 7 minutes to midnight. In 47 minutes, Mickey Doyle would feel the ice flood his certainty. 8 hours later, he'd let go of all beliefs. In 7 days, Dutch Schultz would discover that some lines cost more than kingdoms to cross. The Cotton Club resumed its murmurs. Glasses refilled. The needle finally replaced. But the laughter echoed thinner. Voices carried weight. Everyone who left that club knew they'd witnessed a spark. The kind cities don't outlive. Bumpy Johnson had been hit in front of a crowd, but his silence wasn't defeat. It was the quiet before the storm, the kind of silence that promised blood wouldn't fall in drops, but rivers. 3 days before Mickey Doyle stepped into the Cotton Club with arrogance stitched into every step, Harlem had its harmony, an uneasy balance held together by a code as real as currency. 50,000 people depended on the numbers. It wasn't just a hustle, it was hope. You could bet a nickel. And if the number hit, earn $8. That meant rent got paid. Kids ate. Life inched forward. It wasn't gambling, it was survival. And behind that fragile ecosystem stood Stephanie St. Clair, known as Queenie, the iron beneath the powder. She ran the numbers like a bank with cleaner books and sharper enforcement. She was 42 and had built her empire from scratch. Hers was an authority that didn't ask twice. She didn't negotiate with disrespect. Bumpy Johnson was her enforcer, but the title didn't explain the man. He wasn't muscle, he was mind. Calling him an enforcer was like calling a maestro a piano tuner. Bumpy's job was to make sure the business stayed clean in an industry where the law didn't reach and where the consequences weren't filed away by clerks. Then Dutch Schultz turned his eyes on Harlem. Schultz made his fortune flooding the Bronx with bootleg whiskey, loud, dirty money that came wrapped in shattered bones and filled coffins faster than undertakers could clear the backlog. He eyed Harlem not as a community, but as a cash machine. The profits made his liquor trade look like pocket change, so he decided to take it. 12 soldiers under Schultz's flag marched into Harlem early on a Tuesday morning. They moved in threes, teams with pistols and shoulder holsters, milk bottles filled with gasoline, and baseball bats scarred with old blood. They made stops on 125th Street, on Lenox, on every corner tied to the numbers. The message was simple and violent. This isn't yours anymore. You answer to Dutch now. Pay or burn. In a dusty barbershop on 132nd, they found Calvin Brooks, a 19-year-old collector who started working numbers at 15 for Queenie. Half his paycheck went to his mother's house every month. They pointed a pistol at his temple, told him to hand over the day's cash or catch a bullet. Point blank, Calvin gave up the $240 and threw up in an alley afterward. Not from fear of death, but from knowing exactly what it would mean to Queenie. No one stole from her. No one survived if they did. Within 2 days, Schultz's crew had made the rounds. 18 locations hit. 1 broken arm. 1 burned grocery. 4 grand taken by force. The cops? They saw nothing. That's what $300 a month bought you on Captain Howard's payroll at the 28th precinct, a blindfold and an extra long lunch break. Bumpy sat in Queenie's office above a dress shop on 7th Avenue, taking notes. Leather-bound book, names, addresses, times, patterns. Queenie paced like a lioness behind bars, chain-smoking, rage radiating off her. Smoke curled above her head like steam from a boiling pot. "We strike now," she said. "Hit them back, hit them hard, burn something they love, and leave teeth in the ash." Bumpy didn't stop writing. His voice didn't rise. And then what? He sends 20 more tomorrow, then 50, then the Italians. And suddenly we're not fighting 1 war, we're fighting 6. "We just let 'em walk in and take everything?" Her voice cut clean through the room. Bumpy closed the notebook and met her stare. His eyes weren't angry. They were composed, dangerous. He spoke low. "No, we let him think he's winning. Let him get comfortable. Let him imagine he owns Harlem. Then we remind him that believing something doesn't make it true." He paused. "That's not a speech," she said coldly. "It's surrender." Bumpy stood up, walked to the window, and stared down onto the street. People move through Harlem like blood through veins, life everywhere. The answer is patience. Schultz plays Bronx rules. He stacks ammo and sends hammers when respect runs low. Harlem plays different. Harlem's rules are old, and when he breaks enough of them, the people watching from the shadows will rise and do our work for us. "You mean the Italians," she said. He nodded. "Lucky Luciano doesn't want noise. Doesn't want press sniffing around. Doesn't want white gangsters starting race wars in pockets where his money sleeps quietly. Schultz makes noise, hurts business. Eventually, Luciano decides who's the real liability. And if Luciano does nothing," Bumpy turned from the window. His smile was tight, precise. "Then we do it ourselves, but smart, quiet, so when the smoke clears, they can't trace anything. And we're still standing." For the next 3 days, Bumpy did nothing. At least, nothing anyone could see. But real power, lives invisible. His people followed Schultz's men, watched every move, what bars they got drunk in, what girls they left with, what cars they parked where. In his kitchen, Bumpy laid out a map of Harlem, with red thread stretching like a spiderweb between hits. A second notebook tracked lives, names, families, routines, the blueprint of vulnerability, the places where a silent war could be won by outthinking, not outgunning. He wasn't plotting murder. He was engineering inevitability. Queenie found him at 2 in the morning. She poured herself a drink without asking. 6 more places hit, she said. 5 grand taken. They broke Jimmy Dawson's jaw with a tire iron. Said he was too slow answering. Bumpy didn't look up immediately. He traced a thread across the paper with a fingertip. "Let them take it," he said. "Let them?" Her voice was disbelief. He nodded. "Every dollar is evidence. Every broken bone is another exhibit when we make our case. You talk like a judge. I talk like a man who builds traps so perfectly the rats think it's a feast." He closed the notebook. "I want Schultz thinking Harlem rolled over. No fight. Smooth conquest. That's when gangsters make mistakes. And I've been waiting since they stepped through the first door. And if they don't mess up, then we help them." Her eyebrow lifted. "We feed them bait wrapped in brass. Let them think they've won. And when they smile, we snatch their teeth." "How long?" she asked. He looked at the wall clock. 2 a.m. Not long now. Schultz is settling in, and his boys are getting sloppy. She lit another cigarette. "What kind of stupid are we prepping for?" Bumpy smiled. The kind of smile with no warmth behind it. The kind of stupid where they put hands on us in public, where they think respect doesn't apply, or their pride gives us the green light we've been building toward. You already know how they'll fall, she said. He nodded. I've known since day one. I've been shaping it piece by piece. I just need fire. And Schultz, he was the fool carrying matches. 3 days after Schultz's men stormed Harlem like they already owned it, Mickey Doyle walked into the Cotton Club and delivered the spark. A slap meant to humiliate became the final piece in a trap Bumpy had been building with care and silence. And the best part? Doyle had no clue he'd just signed his own death certificate. The countdown had started. 47 minutes until the doors would close around him. 47 minutes until Harlem answered the question, what happens when you put your hands on the wrong man? As Mickey Doyle stepped outside the Cotton Club, the city inhaled. The door shut behind him, firm, final. His Packard was only 3 blocks down Lenox Avenue. But those 3 blocks might as well have been across the ocean. He made it to the corner, stopped. Something was wrong. The street wasn't empty, but it wasn't loud either. It was too quiet, too watched. 6 men emerged from doorways or shadows, calm, casual, smoking cigarettes right where Doyle needed to walk. Doyle stepped into the street to move around them. A delivery truck appeared like a conjuring trick, rattling engine, blocking the whole road. Doyle's breathing kicked up a notch. He turned, headed for 8th Avenue. More men now. Groups of 3 and 4 stood on corners, eyes everywhere, but none of them looked directly at him. Yet he felt followed, hunted like a bleeding thing in a tide of sharks. Inside, in the back office of the Cotton Club, Bumpy picked up the phone. Dialed a number only 3 people were allowed to use. On the 4th ring, Dutch Schultz's voice growled into the line like gravel scraping a tin pan. This about Mickey? Bumpy's voice was level, measured like a metronome. I'm giving you a choice. Your man touched me, in front of 200 witnesses. Every one of them now waits to see what respect costs. Schultz didn't answer right away. Say what you want. Send him back inside. Have him apologize publicly. Then pull your men out of Harlem, every last one. You do that, and Mickey walks away breathing. Schultz laughed. It was short and bitter. And if I tell you to go to hell? Bumpy stepped to the window. Watch Doyle, now boxed in by his own decisions. Then your man won't walk out of Harlem. When we're done, you won't find enough of him left to bury. You send 20 more tomorrow. I'll send all 20 back zipped and silent. You've got 30 minutes to choose. Silence stretched on the line. Not the kind made from confusion, the kind born of calculation. Dollars against dignity. Power against proof of weakness. Finally, Schultz's voice returned. You think some uptown runner makes demands like he's got clout? This is my city. If Mickey has himself a bad night, that's on him, not on me. Bumpy's jaw tightened, knuckles bone white on the receiver. So that's your answer? Through the phone, Schultz hissed one more breath. Do what you want with him. But tomorrow, I'm rolling 50 into Harlem. We're burning every numbers bank, every bar, every building you collect from. Bumpy closed his eyes for just a beat, then opened them with resolve written behind his stare. Then we understand each other. He hung up. From the window, Queenie turned back from her silent vigil. He said no. Bumpy nodded once. Too proud, too dumb. He thinks Mickey's death costs less than owning up. That kind of man always thinks blood is cheaper than sorry. He picked up the phone again. Dialed another number. It rang once. A voice answered before the second. It's time, Bumpy said. The one out front. Take him to Gerard. He paused. Don't touch him yet. Wait for me. He turned to Queenie. Call Tommy. Call Ray. Tell them bring the car around back. What are you going to do? Bumpy buttoned his coat. His fingers checked the weight of his .38 snug in the shoulder holster. A ritual, not panic. I'm going to teach Dutch what happens when you let ego make your decisions. Down on the street, Doyle tried running, his body waking up to the threat his mind had ignored. He He bolted toward the bridge, made it a block. 3 men stepped into his path. He turned. 4 more blocked him the other way. Desperate, he drew his pistol, gripped it with both hands, shouting threats that shook more than the bystanders. But no one moved. No one answered. They watched him like the outcome was already known, like prophecy. Doyle fired twice into the air. Gunshots cracked through the Harlem night, but no windows opened. No sirens. No one cared. He fired again, wild, aimed low, missed by miles. He dropped the empty gun, threw it at someone like hope might ride with it, then turned and ran face first into a parked car. His ribs met steel. Air whooshed from his lungs. Down he went. 3 men walked up behind him, measured pace, casual menace. One spoke softly. "Mr. Johnson wants to talk. Walk to the car or we'll drag you. That's your only say." Doyle tried to get his feet under him. His body struggled like a puppet pulled by the wrong strings. They picked him up under the arms as if he weighed nothing. Carried him to a black sedan idling at the corner. Lights off, motor humming like quiet thunder. They pushed him between 2 men who smelled like sweat, cigarettes, and gun oil. The door shut. The car pulled away and nosed its way southward toward the Bronx, toward a place you didn't just drive past by accident, toward a warehouse where no one screamed and got heard. That warehouse had no name, only shadows. Windows smothered in black paint, doors chained since a textile company collapsed years ago. Nearest neighbors lived 3 blocks away. Perfect, in other words. Inside that warehouse, tools hung on the wall like instruments waiting for a single, long note. A steel chair bolted to concrete. A drain in the center with work history behind it. Mickey sat in that chair for 8 hours, and the cost of that slap was extracted slowly, one principle at a time. Mickey Doyle sat bound in that chair like a man about to take the final test you don't pass by answering questions. His wrists tied behind him, rope digging into flesh. Ankles secured to steel legs. His face was swelling. Left side puffed and purple. Someone had hit him in the car, not to ruin him, just enough to remind him where he was headed. He wasn't gagged. No one cared about who heard what he might scream. No neighbors, no mercy. Bumpy Johnson stepped into the warehouse at 4 a.m., his polished shoes echoing sharp against concrete. Tommy and Ray stood at the entrance, cigarettes dying between their fingers. They said nothing, just held the door open and followed him inside. A single light bulb swung gently overhead, making every shadow seem alive. Bumpy took off his hat and placed it neatly beside a table. On it, planted like a warning, an array of tools. A razor, pliers, the hammer, a blowtorch half full. He didn't reach for anything yet. He just stood there, quiet, like a surgeon reading a chart, not yet touching the patient. He looked at Mickey Doyle with no hate, no fire, only possession. Like Mickey was the property of a choice made earlier that night. "Do you know why you're here?" Bumpy's voice came low, almost calm, friendly, if you weren't listening too closely. Mickey's breath came in sharp gasps. He tried to speak. At first, just air. Then faint words clawed out from his throat. "Schultz. Schultz will kill you for this. He'll burn Harlem down." Bumpy shook his head slowly, one side to the other like he was correcting a student. "No. Schultz already made his choice. I called him. I offered him a trade. Your life for his pride, for respect. Just say sorry. Just step out. You walk out breathing." He picked ego, picked his reputation, told me you're not his problem anymore. Mickey's face turned to paper. Every ounce of color disappeared, like his soul had sprinted for the door without him. He said that. His voice cracked under the weight of disbelief. "Those were his words," Bumpy replied. "Do what I want with you." His tone didn't rise. His gaze never softened. "And now, that's what I'm going to do." Bumpy stepped over to the table and picked up the straight razor, folded it open, blade catching the light like silver water. No rush, no noise, just inevitability. In my world, reputation is currency. You can have all the cash in your pocket, but if people stop fearing you, stop respecting you, then that cash is worthless. You slapped me in front of my entire economy. If I let that slide, the whole thing falls down. Mickey cried, silent at first, then breaking into trembling sobs. I didn't mean Schultz told me to, he said. I know, Bumpy cut in. Orders. He put down the razor and picked up the hammer. Lifted it up, weighing it in his hand like a craftsman. That's one reason you're still breathing. Mickey shook his head. I was just following orders. Orders don't erase consequences, Bumpy said. Orders just explain how we got here. What happened next? No papers ever printed. No precinct filed a report. But the details are whispered by men who were in that room. 8 hours of instruction. 8 hours of Bumpy Johnson walking Mickey Doyle through a conversation about economics, one bone at a time. He spoke in that same calm voice, a professor explaining principles to a failing student, the importance of fear, the formula of control, the need for order. The tools were chosen not with rage, but intent, the razor, the hammer, the pliers. Each had its moment, and in each moment, Mickey understood a little more. He screamed, loud until his throat gave out. Then still louder, without sound, his mouth wide but airless, just broken, wet breath and agony. No one left the room. Tommy and Ray stood near the edges, smoking again, never flinching, never looking directly, but never missing what each sound meant. They'd seen it before. They'd see it again. This was debt collection in a system with no courthouse. By noon, Mickey couldn't scream anymore. By 2, he wasn't responding to words. By 4, he wasn't really conscious. His chest rose only occasionally, gasping in shallow, useless straws. Bumpy washed his hands in a bucket Tommy brought, dried them with a towel like finishing a day at work. Take him to the Bronx, he said. Leave him where Schultz's people will find him. Make him visible. Make the message loud without saying a single word. Tommy and Ray untied the ropes, lifted what was left of Mickey. No struggle, just limp weight. Loaded him into the car's trunk. He was still breathing, barely, when they closed it. He wouldn't be by the time they crossed the Harlem River. They laid him on the steps of a club on Arthur Avenue, where Schultz's collectors met at sunrise. The street lamps were still humming when the first man arrived at 6:20. He froze as he stared at what lay crumpled on the stairs, and then ran inside shouting a name over and over, like saying it might change what he'd found. Mickey Doyle. The message had been cut into the mess of Mickey's chest, not with ink or paint or words written in haste, but carved into his flesh with deliberate cruelty. Every letter exact, every inch wide enough to read from the sidewalk. Harlem is not for sale. No metaphor. No subtlety. Just certainty. Schultz could send 50 more men, could flood the streets with blood and fire, but every one of them would see what had been done to Doyle, and they would ask themselves one quiet question. Was it worth it? And just like that, what money builds, fear can unravel. Quietly, rapidly, fear spreads like fire licking through dry leaves, and once it's there, it doesn't just slow progress, it scorches it. Bumpy Johnson went home just as the sun came up, took a long shower, put on a clean suit, same as any other day, and returned to the Cotton Club for breakfast, as if nothing had happened at all. The newspapers never spoke Mickey Doyle's name again. The cops never opened a file. He simply ceased to exist, swallowed by the silence of a world that understood how certain lines should never be crossed. Ever. You could take Harlem with bullets. You could control corners, shake down shopkeepers, burn fear into notes and stacks of cash. But once fear itself changes sides, once it belongs to your enemy, you lose before the gun comes out of its holster. That morning, as Mickey Doyle's body cooled on the steps of a Bronx social club, Dutch Schultz received the kind of wake-up call that could end an empire. Written across Mickey's chest, in his own blood, was a truth no one could argue with. No threats, no demands, just reality. Harlem wasn't for sale. What came next wasn't a war. It was subtraction, calculated, simple, clean. 7 days after Doyle stopped breathing, 8 more of Schultz's men vanished, silently. No public shootouts, no sirens. They just stopped showing up. No headlines, no chaos, just absence. Like someone had erased names from a ledger that Bumpy kept privately in ink that dried years ago. The first body surfaced in the East River, face down, throat cut so wide the coroner claimed it looked like someone had tried to take his head off and gave up halfway through. It wasn't revenge. It was a signature. The second man didn't clock in for his route on 128th. His crew waited, then checked his apartment. The door was unlocked. Car outside. Keys in the ignition, but the driver's seat soaked in fluids that made questions irrelevant. The third, fourth, and fifth disappeared together. Last seen drinking at a Bronx bar, bragging about what they were going to do to Harlem next. 3 days later, their bodies were pulled from a construction site in Queens, buried under fresh concrete meant to settle into sidewalk, now a silent tomb. No one talked, no witnesses. The NYPD gave the murders all the concern they saved for criminals killing criminals, barely a shrug. Dutch Schultz knew who did it. He just couldn't prove it. And not being able to prove it was worse, because what he knew, his men also knew. And knowing meant doubting. Doubting meant hesitating. By the end of that week, Dutch was missing more than bodies. He was losing control. In total, 11 men. Gone, not wounded, not jailed, vaporized from existence. And the lie he told himself, that Harlem was still his, cracked every time one of his own asked, "Is this worth it?" Because blood buys territory, but fear buys silence. And silence was now on Bumpy Johnson's payroll. But Schultz wasn't just fighting Bumpy. Not anymore. He was about to learn that his real problem wasn't Harlem, it was Midtown. It was men in better suits, sitting in private rooms, counting profits quietly and swiftly. The Commission, Lucky Luciano, Frank Costello, the boardroom kings of crime. They ran New York like accountants ran banks. Territories, percentages, peace by agreement. What Schultz was doing, making headlines, stacking bodies like firewood, provoking race wars, they didn't call that business. They called that a problem. When things got noisy, legislators started watching. Cops started asking questions they weren't paid to ask, and attention was the only currency worse than pride in the streets. Frank Costello made the first move. Diplomatic, smooth, a meeting, scheduled not requested. At a restaurant in Little Italy, Schultz thought he was showing up to talk strategy, talk next steps. Instead, he sat across from 5 men who made his empire look like a backroom dice game. Men who measured value in decades, not days. And every face looked at him like a dead man talking. Luciano didn't waste greetings. "You're making noise," he said. "We don't like noise. Your Harlem situation, it ends now." Costello leaned in, voice like ice melting slow. "Find a quieter place for ambition. Pick another block, preferably one that doesn't lead to Washington sniffing around. You're hurting everyone's bottom line." Schultz's temper lit fast, his jaw clenched, face flushed, like a man who still thought he was too valuable to be replaced. "I don't back down from some Harlem hustler who thinks he owns zip codes. I already lost 11 men on not pulling out 'cause you're scared of newspaper ink." Costello didn't blink. He simply said, "You lost 11 men, you fresh out of aces. This isn't personal, it's math." Schultz stood, chair screeching wood over tile. "I'm not leaving Harlem. I'll burn it down first. And if that's a problem, then maybe we settle this now." The room froze. 5 still men. 1 funeral soul. Luciano didn't look tense. He didn't even raise his voice. "Sit down." But Dutch didn't. He turned on his heel and stormed out, marched back to the Bronx like he'd won something. He hadn't. He'd stepped off a cliff and convinced himself he could fly. When he rejected the Commission's command, Schultz didn't just defy men, he defied the system. He told the Banker Board of Crime that their rules, their profits, their structure meant nothing. And the system doesn't forgive threats. The system eliminates problems. 3 weeks later, October 23rd, Dutch Schultz walked into the Palace Chop House in Newark, sat in the back with 3 of his guys, drank cold beer, played cards, laughed like he didn't have a target painted between his eyes. At 10:32 p.m., men came through the kitchen. They didn't speak. They didn't wait. 8 shots. 2 hit Dutch in the stomach. He dragged himself to the bathroom, slumped against the wall, guts leaking. He lived. Barely. 22 more hours, most of it delirious. His police statement. Gibberish. The damage inside him too deep, too final. The papers called it a gang war. The cop shrugged again. Luciano called it necessary. Bumpy Johnson? He heard the news while eating breakfast at the Cotton Club, folded his paper like any other day. The man who had tried to buy Harlem was gone, not because Bumpy killed him, but because Schultz broke the rule that mattered most. He brought heat. He created chaos, and the problem with chaos is that it interrupts money. Luciano's commission removed Schultz the way a body removes bad organs. Quick, clean, permanent. Harlem. It returned to rhythm. The books balanced. Queenie counted numbers instead of casualties. Bumpy sat where he always had, enforcing peace as precisely as punishment. The story wasn't over. But Dutch's chapter closed, with Dutch Schultz buried under headlines he'd never read. Harlem exhaled. The noise stopped. The fear changed sides again. For the first time in weeks, nobody was watching the sidewalks with hands in their pockets and eyes over their shoulders. The vacuum didn't last long, but it didn't need to. Within 3 days, the phone rang. Frank Costello called Bumpy Johnson, not to threaten, not to bark, but to offer a seat at the table. Power didn't come from force. It came from recognition. They met in Midtown, behind tinted glass and velvet curtains, far from the neighborhoods that bled. A steakhouse baked in cigar smoke, thick with quiet tension. Each brought their men, not for show, for insurance. Costello opened calmly. Schultz made mistakes, he said. He mistook violence for vision. Thought smashing windows was strategy. Thought walking into Harlem was the same as keeping it. He poured whiskey into 2 glasses, slid one across the table. But you proved him wrong, respectfully, efficiently. And the commission acknowledges that. Then the offer. We propose peace. Harlem stays yours. Numbers, operations, all yours. We don't interfere. We don't demand. We don't send anyone. No cuts, no confusion. Bumpy didn't touch the glass, just listened. Finally, one question. And what do you want? Costello smiled, measured, like a man who appreciated how little needed to be said between equals. Quiet, he replied. We want Harlem calm. No stories, no corpses in alleyways. We want numbers to hum like engines, not explode like grenades. And if anyone tries to disrupt your streets, you handle it. No blood in the papers. No heat on the system. Bumpy extended his hand across the table. Costello took it. That handshake rewrote Harlem's future. No press release, no police file. Just a gentleman's agreement forged in fire, sealed by men who understood the weight of promises made at the edge of a blade. For the next 30 years, the Italian families never set foot in Harlem without permission. Not because they feared Bumpy's gun, but because they respected his mind, his order. His silence. No one challenged the understanding. No one tested the boundaries. The commission had many unwritten rules, and this one had been burned into their memory in blood and strategy alike. The night at the Cotton Club became legend long before it aged. Mickey Doyle's name faded from the streets. In a year, people had stopped speaking it. In 2, you couldn't find anyone who admitted to knowing him. He'd become a whisper behind glass, a smudge on the chapter that introduced Bumpy Johnson to empire. But Bumpy, he remained. When he walked down 125th, people didn't move out of fear. They stepped aside out of respect. Reverence, the kind you don't teach, you earn. The kind lined with discipline. When he drank that Barolo at the Cotton Club, no one interrupted. And when he spoke, streets listened. Not because of volume, because of memory. And respect is just memory wrapped in silence. In 1968, Bumpy Johnson suffered a heart attack inside Wells' restaurant. He collapsed without drama, died the way he lived, quietly, even when he changed everything. Thousands lined the streets at his funeral. Streets that once bled for him now mourned him. And while flowers came from many, one stood out. Carlo Gambino, head of the most powerful family in New York, sent a 6-foot floral arrangement. No extravagance, just a simple card tied to the stem. It said, "A man of his word." Costello, retired and thawing in Florida, called Stephanie St. Clair himself to offer condolences. He didn't mention the slap. He didn't need to. He reminded her that the agreement forged in 1935 over blood and silence would remain intact for as long as she wanted it to. The Cotton Club eventually shut its doors. The warehouse on Girard was torn down, converted into expensive lofts, the kind with glass walls and granite counters, the kind where nobody would ever guess what screams once echoed off those painted black windows. The people who saw that September night unfold, most were buried by the time disco came around. Some cremated. Others lay to rest under headstones that read nothing about the war they survived. But the story lived. Every hustler who came after, every man who reached for Harlem's pulse with ambition and grit, heard the same lesson, passed down in shadow. Real power isn't the man who fires first. Real power is the man who's still standing when the echoes stop and everyone left is looking for orders. Mickey Doyle never saw the trap. Dutch Schultz never saw the cost. But Bumpy built the chessboard. And when he absorbed that slap in front of 200 people, he didn't react because he didn't need to. That wasn't surrender. That was design. The slap was a match, and Harlem burned on his terms. The legend of Bumpy Johnson didn't survive just because of what he did, but because of how he did it. Harlem didn't idolize him because he was the most violent, or the richest, or the loudest. They remembered him because he knew the rules of power better than anyone who ever stepped foot on those streets. He didn't need to kill to prove something, but when he did, it taught the kind of lessons that echo through generations. He understood what Schultz never could. Violence for the sake of ego is noise, and noise fades. But violence backed by strategy, that becomes memory. That becomes law. People didn't just fear Bumpy. They believed in the balance he kept. You didn't disrupt that kind of man lightly, because the consequences weren't just about loss. They were about legacy. After Mickey Doyle vanished from the story, after the commission erased a foolish man named Dutch, Harlem kept moving. People bet their nickels, collected on Fridays. Grocery stores stayed open. Rents got paid. The system kept breathing because order had been restored. And yet that restoration didn't come from winning a war. It came from showing Harlem was never for sale, not by bullets, not by fear, not even under pressure. Bumpy didn't talk about it afterward. He didn't need to. The people who needed to understand already had. His men didn't brag. Queenie didn't dwell. Tommy and Ray never spoke the name Mickey Doyle again. The message built into those 47 minutes had already been delivered, buried deep in the mind of every man thinking about shifting a boundary or breaking a rule. The streets knew. The story did the work. They called it a cautionary tale. They told it in barbershops, in jails, in places where respect was currency and death was interest charged on late payments. Criminals with ambition heard it and hesitated, not because they couldn't fight, but because they feared what kind of ghost they might become if they crossed that same line. The truth? Harlem was protected by more than bullets and brass knuckles. It was guarded by memory. And memory is a weapon no one can steal. As time passed, the memory of Bumpy Johnson only grew sharper. Every time someone eyed Harlem like a new gold mine, someone else reminded them, not of what Bumpy did, but what it meant. That some streets answered disrespect not with fire, but with silence so deep it rattles your bones. Power, real power, doesn't show off. It doesn't shout. It waits. It calculates. It moves only once, but that one move ripples out forever. Mickey Doyle wasn't just a man with poor timing. He was a lesson sewn into the bricks of Harlem's streets. The slap wasn't what made Bumpy dangerous. It was the calm, the pause, the stillness that followed. No threats, no screaming. Just a look, an intention. And 47 minutes later, the world changed. Carlo Gambino sent flowers. Frank Costello kept the peace. Lucky Luciano's successors honored the handshake, and Harlem stayed under the watch of people who knew not just how to take power, but how to keep it without setting the city on fire. And in all those years that followed, men whispered the same belief. You could challenge a man, you could fight a crew, but if your ambition interrupted the system, that system would respond, not out of revenge, not out of anger, but because the machine doesn't run on heat, it runs on money, timing, and order. And anything that endangers that vanishes. Dutch Schultz thought Harlem was just untapped profit. He thought fire and fists could buy him respect. Instead, he discovered there are men you do not slap, not in private and especially not in public. Because some men don't defend themselves with punches, they make you regret landing yours. Bumpy Johnson taught Harlem and the Commission what happens when patience meets power. And when it was all over, when Schultz was gone and the streets were quiet again, Bumpy didn't throw a parade. He sat in the Cotton Club, poured a glass of wine, and reminded everyone watching that the real lesson was simple. You don't keep a neighborhood by fighting for it. You keep it by making sure everyone understands that crossing you costs everything. And that kind of power, that lasts forever. History doesn't always leave behind statues and headlines. Sometimes it leaves behind silence, the kind that echoes louder than any bullet ever could. Bumpy Johnson didn't shape Harlem with noise. He carved his legacy in restraint, timing, and consequences that couldn't be undone. He didn't just defend a neighborhood. He defined how power behaves when it wears a suit instead of a gun. And in the decades that followed, the shadow he cast reminded anyone watching that real power is not about how hard you hit. It's about how long your decisions are remembered. Some men are feared, some men are forgotten, but the rare few become the rules no one dares break. If this story gripped you, if Bumpy Johnson's legacy made you see power in a new light, then don't just walk away. Hit that subscribe button. We're telling the stories that shook cities and rewrote codes. Drop a like if you believe respect should never be for sale. Tap the bell so you never miss the next lesson written in real history. These aren't just crime stories. They're stories about choices, strategy, and a kind of leadership that doesn't come with a title. Help us keep these stories alive. If you were in that club the night Bumpy got slapped, what do you think you would have done in his place? Would you have stayed silent like Bumpy, or reacted different? Type silence is power if you felt his calm made the biggest impact. We're reading every comment,